Hi everyone, my name is Alicia Panzarella, and some of you may already recognize me. I know as I was looking over the class list, a lot of familiar names, so it's nice to virtually see most of you again, and it's nice to meet everyone in the class. So there's me over there. I did graduate from Millersville back in December of 2015. After graduating there, I did teach in Virginia for 2 years, but now I teach physics over at Eastern York High School. And then new to this year, I'm going to be the Science Olympiad co-advisor and the assistant boys volleyball coach. So kind of two exciting things coming into this school year. Couple hobbies, pretty much anything that involves the outdoors. That is where I will be. Big fan of fitness, whatever that may look like other than running. But everything else, I really enjoy that fitness component, especially if it is weightlifting. And I found a new hobby, if you want to call it a hobby, through this whole COVID experience, and that is fostering animals. So this is my current foster dog. His name is Dexter. He is awesome. If you ever get the opportunity to foster, I absolutely highly recommend it. And I am in the STEM endorsement portion, and I am at the finish line. So this is my last class, except for one that I will be taking in the winter. So we are right at the end. Okay, so taking a look at the first question, where could be a potential sticking point? And my initial thought going into this class, really only having glanced at what we're going to be doing, I thought that the literary review was going to be the hardest part. Because in some of the other classes that we've had, I found that finding relevant articles was a little bit difficult. Even reading through an abstract, you think, hey, this is going to be really helpful. This really goes along with my paper. And then 45 minutes later, you're like, this doesn't pertain to what I was looking at all. So I kind of found it difficult to really get some articles and journal entries that were relevant to what I was looking at. So I thought, that's going to be the same because I don't know quite what's going on with this. But kind of after looking at the different chapters, I think that the action portion is actually going to kind of be the most difficult part, which is kind of interesting considering the action portion is where you do the experimentation, you collect the data, and as a physics teacher, that should be like right up my alley. But where I think it's going to be difficult is that, if we take a look at this image, everything kind of circles back to that experimentation and that collection of data. So you do the experiment once, say, hey, I don't think this variable is working. I need to fix that for better results. And now you have to do that whole process again. Find, a new process, collect new data, review that whole new data. And that's going to take a lot of time. That's going to take a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity, and a lot of time, which are all great things. But I think that could be potentially where this process will be the most difficult, is just figuring out how can you take a next step and how can you integrate that in a timely fashion, both for yourself and the students so that it's actually meaningful. Some obstacles, I'm sure a lot of us are kind of feeling the same thing. Like I said, the time component, I know, at least for me with COVID, we are a 50-50 split, so we are hybrid. So just kind of figuring out how to maneuver only seeing kids face to face twice a week and then 3 days virtually, how is that going to work for this whole process? And then just the general demands of teachers' time, regardless of COVID, if this was just a normal school year, you still have the general day-to-day demands. Another obstacle I would say would be resources, the literature availability. I had my AP students last year actually do like a research project, and one of the biggest obstacles that we found was that they couldn't find, published journal entries, works that weren't just coming off of, any old website. I wanted them to do a literature review, and it was very hard to get those concrete resources. Most of them you had to pay a lot of money for to get those entries. And then also the professional community. I think if I wasn't in this class, it is a little bit difficult to find people who are willing to take that time out of their day and, bounce ideas back and forth. And that was one of the things that I kind of really took away from both of the stories, was that both of those people had a professional community that they worked with in order to get those end results, in order to go through this whole process. And although, we page 22 talks about how we do this on kind of a day-to-day basis or a unit basis, to do it big scale where you're looking at where were the triumphs, where were the concerns. You do need a community that's willing to do that with you, and I don't know if that is always available, and that kind of goes back to the time component. And then also professional development. To do something to this scale, where you're really taking a lot of time, really thinking through all these different pieces, you do need, at least in my opinion, to have some type of training on it. I know if I were to just try to do this after watching a YouTube video, it is definitely not going to have the same result as actually having professional training. So I think these are some of the obstacles that the average person would go through when doing action research. And then I found that I resonated with Julie the most, just because a lot of her thoughts as she went into the conference, I have had, and even down to, a whole bunch of people started with this, great idea after the conference, and then it dwindled down to just two. But what I liked is that Julie kind of persevered through that. When everybody else said, I don't have time for this, it doesn't relate to me, she said, no, I'm going to stick with this because this is good for my students, this is good for myself. So she had a couple quotes that I really liked. And the first one was a chance, I spelled that incorrectly, I'm sorry, a chance to study my own practice and the proficiencies of my students with one eye toward what worked and what didn't. So she was kind of saying, in the past, I just looked at, other people's research as how is that going to relate to me? Whereas she's saying, no, action research is about my classroom, and now I can focus on that and have that research component be a little bit more meaningful, which I thought was awesome. And then she said researchers need each other's ideas for stimulation and depend on others' perspectives to enrich their own. One thing that I have kind of found in both schools that I worked at, I was the only physics teacher. So I didn't really have a lot of people to bounce ideas off of if something didn't go well that day. If I had a question, I was kind of just like an island, and that can be very isolating and also a little frustrating at times because you want this perspective from someone else, but you don't always have the opportunity to get that. So I liked that she had pointed out, you are a team when you try to do this. So I'm excited that we'll have this class to kind of get those different perspectives, get those different ideas, because I definitely appreciate when I have others' ideas and their perspective when looking at what I think is, one path of data. Somebody sees it a totally different way, and it just opens up a whole new field that you can look at. And then with that, I kind of paraphrase this last part. She said, presenting your information allowed for an organization of thought. And I think that's kind of a big thing is, if you're not actually showing this to anyone, you can kind of just get lost in your own rabbit hole of, I could do this, this, and that, and is it going to work? But when you have to present it to someone, you have to be able to articulate, this is what I did, this is what I found, these are the results. And then you kind of start to organize everything that you did and what you learned. So I resonated a lot with that as well. And kind of lastly, the concerns that I have, I think are more just concerns that are a little bit more particular to this year because of COVID. I am a little bit concerned that I'm going to have to change the project or the research, the action research statement that we will eventually choose due to a school shutdown. So if it's something where I need to be with the kids, and we have to change that, well, then that's going to change the whole course of the action research project if it's going from a face-to-face to now just an online version. Same thing as before, timing. Like I said, we are on an A-B schedule, so I only see the kids for a little bit of time. So that may play into the action research project that I do. And then access to resources. With physics, there's a lot that I want to do lab-wise, but is that going to be feasible? So that's going to be kind of another concern that I have. But overall, I'm actually pretty excited to learn what action research is. I definitely had an idea of this that was in like left field. I thought, this was a thesis and I had to write a book and I was just going to be looking at other people's findings. But I'm so happy to learn that this is much more relevant to myself, my students in my classroom. So excited to start this journey with all of you, and have a good night.